Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press. Together, we are Kenny and Renny. This is the Kenny and Renny Unrestricted Free Agent Show, July 1st show, Canada Day show, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't feel like Canada Day down here, I'll tell you that much. Stuck in Vegas. It will come to an end. Renny will escape this glitch in the matrix that he's found himself in. Should be heading home. I'm not even going to jinx it. I won't even tell anybody. I should head home at some point. Russ Lowen says, hi, national media representative. That is exactly what you have here in Kenny and Renny. Happy Canada Day, says Savage 09100. It was a happy one for a lot of hockey fans in the NHL. Maybe not for the Winnipeg Jets. I'm sensing frustration. I am sensing a lot of people who wanted to see the Winnipeg Jets do more. I'm sensing a lot of people who go back to the tried and true in Winnipeg every unrestricted free agency day. Oh man, those prices sure were expensive. We were probably better to stay out of it. That's always a good one. That's the you know what? Yeah, you took a shot, tried to date that girl or that guy, and then they turned you down. And you said, I didn't want them anyways, kind of thing. That's a good response. We'll dive into all those kind of things. But hey, we'll find a lot to talk about, even though the Winnipeg Jets didn't give us lots to talk about on this day. Let's just say this, in not giving us a lot to talk about, they actually have given us a lot to talk about in this situation here, because Pat Rathwell had said it earlier on here in regards to, if I can find it here quickly, I had said if there was a time for them to get the Winnipeg Jets to get involved in here Pat Rathwell says, after listening to what Renny had said about this being the time the Jets should be aggressive in free agency, I'm really disappointed that we didn't address anything today. I'm definitely concerned now. They did address one thing. They addressed their backup goaltending situation, but given the fact that they've basically got the goaltender who refuses to relinquish the crease whenever is possible, the last thing on their list of to-do things or the one that probably matters the least, is getting a backup goaltender. So getting two of them doesn't really move the dial, in my opinion. But I had said that. I do stick by that. I didn't expect that. A lot of people keep, sending me messages, and I say, listen, like, what's happened today is what has happened every single July 1st with the Winnipeg Jets. This is exactly what you should have expected. They are not the team that goes out and makes their splash on this day. They handle their business elsewhere. The Winnipeg Jets have handled a lot of business. Kevin Cheveldayoff has handled a lot of business over the years. So all the people who are suggesting, he's asleep at the cottage or any of those kind of things, this just is not the way. Maybe it's Winnipeg. Maybe players just won't come here on unrestricted free agency day. But maybe that's the case. I don't know if that's 100% the case, but it is most definitely the case that the Kevin Cheveldayoff management group, that regime, does not get things done on this day. So we'll talk about that, because I will say this, a lot went out the door when you take a look at it. And I know the Winnipeg Jets did a lot, and I think that colors what they've done here. They did a lot last year without Sean Monahan in the lineup, before he came to the lineup, before Tyler Toffoli came to the lineup. But let's just say, if you take a look on paper, Laurent Brossoit, a rising star goaltender, out the door. Brendan Dillon, one of the best options the Winnipeg Jets had as far as playing a really solid, really rugged game on a defense that probably needed to get better, not worse. That's tough to see him go out the door. And you add names like even Schmidt, even though he was bought out the door, and Monahan and Toffoli. You take a look at it on paper, you take a look at it out of the lineup. That is a lot of talent the Winnipeg Jets do not have anymore, that they have not as of yet replaced. I don't see the remaining players in unrestricted free agency who could fill those holes. So I don't think this is the way you do it. So we'll talk about, where the Winnipeg Jets go from here, how they could address these things. And I know a great guy to talk about that with. And he just also happens to have the best music in the business, ladies and gentlemen. So why don't we play that music and bring him into the show? Here comes Kenny, everybody. Ken, my friend, like you, I don't know, did we leave the sphere together? I don't think we did, but I was starting
Nope.
to think that we did, because I think you go into that big giant computer that we were in there, and we took a wrong turn and somehow got stuck in the matrix and cannot escape the matrix, which is why we continue to be stuck here in Vegas all this time. But at least we've got some good meals in. We've got some good times in here while we've been here, and we got to cover this remotely. Hey, if there's a year to not be back in Winnipeg, it's one of the years where not a lot happens on
Right.
unrestricted free agency day. That's what we saw from this year. What do you make of it, Ken?
Yeah, quiet for the Jets. And as you touched on, I mean, just because you and I said that the Jets should be aggressive in certain areas if the money made sense, I mean, that didn't mean we expected you know, a big explosion of deals from the Jets end. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's some drain, and there's people that the Jets wanted to have back that are not back, and there are some holes left on the horizon. And we just listened in to the Kevin Cheveldayoff presser, and yes, no surprise, he said this: if you're a young player and a young prospect in the organization, you would be maybe pumping a little extra on those workouts this summer, knowing there's a better opportunity for you. He also alluded to the fact that there's a few irons in the fire. And I mean, one of those irons we expect to be, the potential of Adam Henrique or someone else at that 2C spot. But Sean, we're in agreement. I mean, the Jets' biggest priority for the offseason was to revamp their defense core. And as of today, they're going to be without Brendan Dillon and Nate Schmidt. People, we understand why Nate Schmidt was bought out. And yes, Kevin Cheveldayoff said that money doesn't have to be used on July 1st. But as of right now, they're banking on internal growth, and they're banking on Dylan Sandberg being ready for a second pairing role, and he was great in a third line or a third pairing role. We know that. Neil Pionk, we thought, might have the potential to move back to the third pairing, but as of right now, he's the 2 right D. And again, we know, and we've said this countless times, Neil Pionk went through an incredibly difficult scenario last year in terms of personal loss. I personally think that he had at least a good first half of the season. You could make the case that he was still above average at time, for the majority of the time through 60 games, but he had a tough last quarter of the year, and that continued into the playoffs. So right now, the Jets' defense core is not better. I'm quite confident saying that. Even if Ville Heinola comes in and, like last year, makes the team, there will be opportunity for him. But I can't see he's not going to be an upgrade in certain areas on Brendan Dillon. That's for certain. If you're Logan Stanley, I mean, man, the opportunity's never been better for you. But what does that mean in the big picture? I mean, let's just put it this way: I still expect the Jets to add a defenseman. And then in terms of the second line center job, I mean, if it's not Adam Henrique, maybe like what about a guy like Barrett Hayton? He'd be buy low kind of candidate after being bought out by not qualified by the Utah Hockey Club, making him a unrestricted free agent, the former 5th overall pick there by the Arizona Coyotes. So in terms of the goalies, Sean, I mean, we know the Jets were looking for an upgrade. Not a lot of people know a lot about Kaapo Kähkönen. We know that he's got, skilled and a lot of upside, but that just hasn't translated into NHL success, so far. What it means is the Jets have a stable person in Eric Comrie, who flourished under Wade Flaherty's tutelage in his last year with the Jets before moving to Buffalo on a 2-year deal. Who wins that? Who wins the backup job? It's funny. It's much like when Laurent Brossoit came to the Jets, Sean. When Laurent Brossoit came to the Jets on a one-way contract, people were kind of like, why is this guy getting a one-way contract? He didn't really have a long ledger in the National Hockey League, but he grew into a really good backup. And now a guy who's going to be a 1A, 1B guy with the Chicago Blackhawks. I love the signing by Laurent Brossoit with the Blackhawks. It's one of the teams maybe I should have looked a little more closely at in going into the weekend here when we were trying to do a little bit of digging. Both of us, again, originally thought LA. I thought that Toronto was a good fit. They ended up going with Anthony Stolarz, but Laurent Brossoit, we saw what he did head-to-head against Connor Hellebuyck in the playoffs once, and I'm not saying the Blackhawks are going to be in the playoffs now, but having Brossoit in the Central Division, I'm not sure that's great for the Jets, Sean, quite frankly.
Nope.
And again, it's nothing to do with what they have. We know the Jets have, one of, if not the best NHL goalie right now in Connor Hellebuyck, but Laurent Brossoit is going to help make the Blackhawks better. whether that's in 1 year, in 2 years, or during that 2 years he shows them that he deserves to be a bona fide number one. But great for him to get a little security. He got a nice raise, and again, losing Brendan Dillon is a massive loss for the Jets. Sean, we've talked about this a ton. This is a high character player. 8 goals last year. That's a career high for him. 20 points. Nobody on the back end plays like him. Nobody plays as robust a game as Brendan Dillon. So that's a big hole to fill, and it hasn't been filled so far. And some of those physical guys we've been discussing have already been taken off the board. Now, whether the Jets maybe look at a Yanni Hakanpää or somebody like that.
Hakanpää went to.
Oh, sorry, he went now too. So and Desharnais is gone also. So the two of the big.
Desharnais went to Vancouver. Those are two
of the bangers that we thought
they really would have gone after, and probably could have used, probably could have fit. Not there anymore.
So, and then lastly, when it comes to the sorry, I shouldn't say lastly quite yet, but Sean Monahan. We know the Jets.
The buffet, ladies and gentlemen.
Sorry, we're getting close, Sean. We're getting close. I'm barely over the 5 minutes that you went, so I will hand the baton back very shortly. As you mentioned,
take your time.
We talked about Sean Monahan in the days leading up to this. The Jets wanted Sean Monahan back. Kevin Cheveldayoff said their offer was competitive. He took a direct question from Scott Billeck whether or not the term was the deciding factor. Maybe the Jets didn't want to go to a 5th year. Kevin Cheveldayoff said that wasn't an issue. So we're taking him at his word. That means the Jets offered Sean Monahan a 5-year deal at a competitive rate. And again, for me, Sean, I don't think the Jets could really afford to go beyond 4 years with Sean Monahan, quite frankly. And even though I as a player, I've gone to bat for him plenty, and he brings a lot of to the table, and he will be missed also, depending on what happens with the replacement. He checked a lot of boxes for the Jets, but great for him that he stayed healthy last year. But given the history, I'm not sure if I'm the general manager of the Jets that I could have gone to the 5th year at that dollar value. But that's what free agency is. Tyler Toffoli got $6 million after he didn't fare well with the Jets, but that didn't prevent him as a guy who still eclipsed 30 goals last year, going to a team that was near the bottom. But man, he's going to find himself probably playing on a line with Macklin Celebrini, even though it didn't work out all that well in Winnipeg for him on a 4-year deal. So the Jets will miss Monahan, and good leader. I just listened to the conference call or the Zoom call with Monahan. He did say he gave the Jets serious consideration. It was a tough choice, all of that stuff. But for a guy who's from the East, he's a guy who wanted to be close to his family, especially after he and his wife had a son in Leo recently, and it's just easier for them and family to get to Columbus than it is to get to Winnipeg. And he said that was a factor in his decision. I mean, here's the other thing, Sean. Don Waddell, I listened to his part of the call as well. Don Waddell said Sean Monahan's their number 1 center. And, as much as we know he would have had a very strong role as the number 2 center or even the 1B center in Winnipeg, he is the bona fide number 1 center with Columbus, and he's going to play with his best friend in Johnny Gaudreau, which is something we've talked about for probably a couple months now. And that leaves us with the departure of Nate Schmidt. Again, we knew this was a possibility. During the course of the weekend, I was told the Jets weren't there yet. As it turns out, they changed their mind. They got themselves $3.2 million in space for the short term, but they're also carrying a lot of dead cap space between Nate Schmidt and Blake Wheeler this year, somewhere in that $5 million range. So, they save on the 5.95, but you still got to replace that player, and that player played capable minutes on the third pairing last year. So they're banking on internal growth unless something else happens, and I still expect something to happen on the back end. But yeah, that's and Nate Schmidt, just a great person. We know that he and Brendan Dillon were traded for each other within a 24-hour period in the summer of 2021, and they were a huge part of the culture change with the Winnipeg Jets, for me anyway. And I think they'll be missed both in the room, and they'll also be missed on the ice big time.
I'm going to throw a little bit of a grenade into the conversation here. Kind of challenge one of the things that you said, challenge a narrative that I'm seeing quite a bit from Winnipeg Jets fans here. Because, I don't take issue with, but I will say that everything that I've heard about Sean Monahan, when it came to his injury history, was not that he was an injury-prone player. It was that he had certain injuries that he just could not get past. Everything that I've heard is that he's past those, that those problems have been solved. So I'm not sure if I look at him like that. I don't know that I would bring injuries into the conversation as a reason to stay away from that or not go the fifth year. I see a lot of people out there, a lot of Jets fans. I kind of poked fun at the beginning of the show. Those Jets fans that are like, oh, who if they would have signed Sean Monahan for the very same deal that Columbus signed him for, would be celebrating right now, turn around and say, well, we didn't want it anyways. That's a gross overpay. I challenge that, and I'm going to challenge it right now because I didn't hear too much complaining about Dylan DeMello's deal. Dylan DeMello is 31 years old, and he signs a 4-year deal for $4.9 million. So at $5 million, Dylan DeMello, in my opinion, hey, we talked about this. I think he's a great defenseman. I think he's a number 2 defenseman on a team because he fits really well with Josh Morrissey. But I would argue for the most part, he ends up being a 5-6 defenseman on the vast majority of other teams in the NHL. So that player is 4 years at $4.9 million. Sean Monahan, who walked in here and showed he could do all kinds of things with the Winnipeg Jets, who's 29 years old right now. We're not talking about a guy who's 34 going on a 5-year deal. This isn't the deal that Blake Wheeler signed. This is a guy who's 34 at the end of this deal. It showed he's a really competent guy going for 5.5. I would argue that what I'm hearing from Jets fans about the, whoa, take it easy, overpay, glad we got out of that. I don't know that there is, if you are saying that about Sean Monahan, who was beloved in Montreal for the way he paid, who came here and did all kinds of things for the Winnipeg Jets, I would argue Sean Monahan showed that he is worth every penny of that contract and every year of that contract, especially if you're going to hold that contract up beside Dylan DeMello and see that Dylan DeMello at 31 compared to 29 gets 4 years, one less year at pretty similar money. It's pretty hard to find a 2C. We've seen that before. So I challenge the suggestion out there that this is some kind of ridiculous, crazy overpay for Sean Monahan and that the Jets got out from underneath something that would have been this crazy, massive mistake. The Jets, what they do get out of this is that 2C problem that has been plaguing them for quite some time and looks like it will continue to plague them into the future.
Sure. Just the one thing, though, Sean will turn, he's turning 30 on October 12th.
Still, basically, he's a year younger than Dylan DeMello, so they'll be the same age, essentially, when they get out of their contracts.
Okay. Sure. He's going to be 30 essentially when the season starts, so it's not a 2-year gap. It's more like a 1-year gap.
Both will be 35 at the end of their contracts. I think it's a pretty good comparable.
No, I'm not saying it's not a good comparable. It's a great comparable. I'm just saying
you're splitting hairs on this one, I think.
Sure, but it's a 5-year deal at essentially 30 years old. So there are risks involved, even if you had no injury history.
It's a 4-year deal at 31 years old. It's the same deal. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, what would you say the variation is between Dylan DeMello and Sean Monahan? Take a look around the NHL and say, how would the NHL value Sean Monahan, a 2C?
Well, he's a 1C now, right?
Guy. So, yeah, well, 1C, whatever. But like, what is the value of a 2C versus a number 2 guy who is very specifically there to add a defensive component to your star defender? Like, that's the one thing star defenders like Josh Morrissey elevate the guys around them. Dylan DeMello didn't come to Winnipeg, this prized superhuman defensive player. He came here and found a way to work with that one guy. Now it got him paid, but I guess what I'm saying is all the people who would sit here and say, okay, Dylan DeMello versus Sean Monahan, I would argue the fact that the Columbus Blue Jackets, if you held those two contracts side by side and said we're paying $600,000 a year more for Sean Monahan, I think we did pretty good. I guess I'm just saying I see Winnipeg Jets fans trying to hold something up as a terrible deal. And I think it's just, and I'll say it again, it's like you got rejected by the pretty girl at the bar and you didn't want her anyways, kind of thing.
Well, no, and I mean, let's not ignore the parallels, Sean. I mean, the Columbus Blue Jackets have been looking for center help since Tortorella left, right? Since Pierre-Luc Dubois came to the Jets. So I love the deal for Columbus, but and I, again, I would have no problem. I said, I said up to $5 million, and people were saying, "Oh, you shouldn't give Sean Monahan $5 million." I don't think this is a gross overpay by any stretch. I am saying that there are risks. There's always going to be a risk attached to someone when he's in his 34, 35-year-old season, I guess, that's basically all I'm saying. And I agree with you. And again, this whole myth about Sean Monahan slow, like, that's not accurate. Sean Monahan, after he got healthy, isn't a slow player. He's not a Nikolai Ehlers burner, but he's a solid skater. He's not below average. So he's leaving a big hole here. He's leaving a big hole, and I could not agree more. I'm just saying, like, that, there's risks attached to any player above 30. So even the most durable guys.
Let's not get crazy. Sean Monahan left a lot to be desired in his performance in the playoffs with the Winnipeg Jets. So I'm not trying to say I you know me. I like to call stuff out that I think is a little bit, sure. I don't know if it's offside, but I feel like this is getting torqued. I feel like people trying to blow this up like holy smokes. Listen. Kevin Cheveldayoff made it clear he was in that ballpark when he was offering that. And I think a lot of the same people who are being like, "Oh, we're lucky to get out of that one," would be beating the drum right now at Portage in Maine if he had been signed for a similar number with the Winnipeg Jets. I'm calling sour grapes on a lot of people. We got to get to some other things here. First, I just want to give a shout out to Vittorio Rossi and the. I couldn't wear the suit any longer because I went
got
to
a good
school,
hat though.
so I had to cut out. But boy, oh boy, did Vittorio Rossi ever take care of me during this season, this playoff run. I want to thank them for that. You would thank them too if you went and gave them a shot at making you look like $1 million, which they would do. And if you want to do that, head on down to Corden Avenue. Walk into Vittorio Rossi, loudly proclaim Kenny and Renny sent you. As for Frankie and the boys, they will do you up right. Shout out as well to Pristine Roofing, who are right in the middle of it, but not so in the middle of it that they couldn't take your call. I'll tell you that right now. If you needed to, you could just make sure that you give North End Rick a call or a text, or 1-204-981-6289. He's the guy who will come down and get you in line. My guess is there's a pretty decent line to get your roof done. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be getting into that line. You don't want to be going into it's already time to think about that. I'm that guy who's going to warn you that winter is just around the corner on July 1st, but you don't want to leave that. Get that
feels
done
like winter in Vegas here, Sean, ends. At 110.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And a shout out again to Cambrian Credit Union. Once again, I just got to say, put a balloon payment on my mortgage just recently. It couldn't have been easier to do so, and got really great advice. I'm glad from one of their agents in the process who's helped us carry this forward. We've got a real good plan on what's going on in the future here because they take the time out to do so. So thank you to them at Cambrian. You and I, both customers,
members.
It's the hair club for men. Except in the banking, we're not just the owners, because everyone who banks there, they're the owners. We're clients as well. Ken, I wanted to say this about the youth movement because I think this is the important conversation going forward. I want to make this clear because I have a lot of these conversations, and last year I don't want to get known as that guy who doesn't like youth or bringing youth into the lineup. I know certain guys, T. Will is a big one who always tells me I'm kind of pushing against that with Billy Hainla and all those different kind of things. I'm entirely okay with the youth movement. And I honestly, if you remember and you rewind this podcast back to last season, I was thinking the Winnipeg Jets were going to have a tear down and a rebuild, which I have no problem going against. I also don't have a problem. Let's say the Winnipeg Jets can't solve any more problems going into UFA and the trades don't work out. I don't have issue with bringing in guys like Lambert and Chibrikov and Hainla and bringing players like that in, and the Jets taking a step back to take a step forward. I've got no problem with that. Even how they talk about, trying to be like Boston Bruins and compete every single year. This year, I think, was a perfect example of the Boston Bruins knowingly taking a step back, knowing that sometimes you got to take a step back to take a step forward. I've got no problem with that. The one thing I will say is last year when the Winnipeg Jets said that they were going to compete every single year for the cup, and that's essentially how they got Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele to kind of sign up. One thing about that, I wasn't the biggest fan of. I think that's a tough promise to make to your players. And I think it's a tough way to sell a guy like Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele on staying in town for a long time, because then you put those players in a position where they can be upset if they don't feel like you've put your best foot forward. Well, you didn't go pick up guys that we needed in unrestricted free agency. This isn't, clearly we're not going to be, someone said it earlier on, the Winnipeg Jets are not as good a team right now as they were this time last year. I think that's 100% correct. And I don't see the path to being better this year than they were last year with what remains in unrestricted free agency. Now, give Kevin Cheveldae off time, and we're going to talk about the stuff that we think he's going to do or the things that he can do to address this team. What's that?
Breaking news. Colin Miller, who we expected to be gone, has signed a 2-year, $1.5 million AAV deal with the Jets. So the right side has a little bit of help here as we speak.
Okay. All right. So we'll get to that in just a second. Let me finish that point, and then we can get to this. My entire point about this, I don't think it's a problem injecting youth. I'm entirely okay with that. I just think the Jets have backed themselves into a little bit of a corner with the promise to Connor Hellebuyck and to Mark Scheifele that they're going to try to compete every year, because now two of your central figures can be upset and feel like, well, this isn't exactly what I signed up for. Hopefully they're understanding. They should be understanding, Ken. They should be the kind of players who, just trust that's not their job. Trust what the management is doing. There's a plan. Sometimes that plan, like a stock, takes you down this year and up the next year. But I do think chasing signings now at this stage, and that'll bring us into, maybe Colin Miller conversation about him, conversation about, you had said Adam Henrique. I think if you go and sign Adam Henrique, it's a great player. I watched him a lot in the last 2 rounds that I covered with the Winnipeg Jets. Can you pull the same thing off the screen there if you're going to pop them up?
Sorry, I didn't.
Anyway, I watched Adam Henrique. I think like you that there's, they'll be kicking the tires on that, and that he may be coming here. But I don't think that's an upgrade on Sean Monahan. And the one thing I do think is signing guys for the specific purpose of just, we got to get a guy in there for that spot. If Adam Henrique is a step down from Sean Monahan, which I believe he is, if Colin Miller is a step down from Brendan Dillon, which I believe he is, then I think you may be filling holes, but you are not heading up, you are heading towards the mushy middle. So I'm at this stage, I look at this and I think I would rather the Winnipeg Jets just leave things and go the youth movement and take a step back and move forward than chasing to fill holes with guys who may not be an upgrade on what they've had in the past. I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. And in chasing, being competitive for the cup every single year by just getting what you can get, that I think puts you in a bit of a tough spot. And I wonder about the Jets heading in that direction, Ken.
Yeah, I mean, what this does for the time being, and yeah, of course, the Jets would have been more stabilized with Sean Monahan down the middle. But, for everyone saying the Jets have fallen off a cliff here, I mean, the Jets were a team battling for first.
Off a cliff.
Right, but some people are saying that, Sean. I mean, a lot of people in my timeline today are saying that, including people we know. The Jets were near or in first place with Vladislav Namestnikov as the second line center for, 55 or 60 games this year. So their forward group, I don't think they do need a whole lot of help, even though, yes,
that's
of course,
my point.
It can help them to be upgraded. And I mean, right now, Brad Lambert, here's your chance. Brad Lambert's not being gifted the job. He was asked, Kevin Cheveldae again, asked directly about it. But this gives him a chance to do the job. And if he can't do the job, they can get someone else at the deadline if they need to get somebody else or during the season or whatever. But they have an opportunity for forwards. And again, we know Cole Perfetti had 19 this year. I'm expecting Cole Perfetti to score 25 plus this year. So their offense, of course they could use a bump, but their offense wasn't a huge issue for them. Would they like to score more? Of course. But we've talked about this a ton, Sean. With a better power play, a lot of guys would have had more offense to their game. So, and we expect that, Davis Payne is going to try to do something about that coming in as an assistant coach. So, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I don't see this as a huge failing. Now, of course, they would have loved to keep him around and they'll miss him. But the Jets' top six is still pretty steady, and they still had a ton of guys that were in double digits in goals. So for me, the bigger issue is on the back end, and that sort of brings us to Colin Miller. Now, Colin Miller is super interesting because he didn't get into the lineup a ton, or not as much as maybe we expected.
It's
Even
hard to
though,
know that they even know what they're getting with them because they didn't really give themselves an opportunity
well,
to know what they had with them.
but the Jets have had Colin Miller. Like, so to me, I say some surprise, but I was surprised because I didn't think Colin would want to stay given the lack of opportunity. It's not a surprise to me that the Jets are interested in keeping him because he had been on their radar for 2 or 3 different times in free agency or at the deadline, dating back to I think even before he was in Buffalo. I think it goes back to when he was in Vegas and stuff. So, anyways, Miller's interesting because he's a good puck mover. He's not a he's not a hugely physical guy. He's not as physical as Brendan Dillon, but in the playoff series against Colorado, in his look, he actually was quite physical in that game, and he is a mobile guy and a puck mover. So, and he has the big shot from the point. So for a guy or for a team that is trying to help their special teams, maybe Colin Miller in that big shot. Now maybe he bumps Neil Pionk off the power play and maybe he's the guy. But again, right now, whether it's Colin Miller, I don't know that Colin Miller can leapfrog Neil Pionk into the second right side defense pairing. But, as of now, we'll see what happens. Again, and I'm not saying the Jets are bringing in a Norris Trophy candidate, but this is a guy who we all talked about wanting to get a better look at. Well, now they have a chance to get a better look at him over the course of a 2-year span here. But again, the Jets defense core is still not as good as it was last year for me, Sean, right? I mean, don't you agree? Right now, the Jets defense core, even with Colin Miller, is not as good as it was last year.
I don't know how someone could possibly say it is. And I don't know. It's funny. I'm seeing a lot of people call me a grump here, but I mean, I don't think I'm grumpy about this. I think I'm saying the exact same thing that you're saying, Ken. Like, do people want us to say somehow the Jets lost 5 important players on this day and got better? Is that what it'll take for you to say that I'm in a good mood? Is that what you want? Is that what you show up to this for? You want to watch me say everything just got perfect, ladies and gentlemen. I've told you, I don't mind at all the Jets going a youth movement and filling all those holes through youth. I have no problem with that. There's part of me that would really, really like to see that. But I also know that if you were going to say right now, let's plug in Lambert and Chibrikov and let's plug in Ville Heinola, that you are going to have to live with their mistakes as they acclimatize to the NHL. And that means that you're going to take a step backwards. I'm very confident that they would take a step backwards in that case. And I don't have a problem with that. Again, I say sometimes you need to take a step back to take a step forward. But the Winnipeg Jets have made it pretty clear that they want to keep competing. They don't want to take a look at last year and say, okay, that's the peak. We finished 4th and got chased out of the playoffs in 5 games. They want to take a step forward. That didn't happen on this day. So I again, Snackatoba seems to think I need a Snickers. That's fine. Give it. Ken, send something up to my room here so I can eat, and somehow whatever I eat is going to.
You could use a Snickers. It's true. It's true.
Someone should send me something here that I can eat and I can turn around and say everything is fine and perfect and got better in the Jets world here someday. It's probably going to be laced with acid, but whatever it is, send it up to my room. Here we go.
Let's just go this way. I mean, the Jets getting better does not mean they need to be a 120-point regular season team. The Jets getting better means they do more than win one game in the playoffs, Sean. And that's not where we will be grading after July 1. I mean, this is fact. Teams around them got better on paper, but that doesn't mean that the Jets are going to be a terrible team next year. And I know you're not saying that, but some people are. Like, some people are talking about the Jets like they're the San Jose Sharks and they're going to be ready for the first overall draft pick. That's not where they're at. The Jets had huge progress in terms of the structure. They're planning on building on that structure, getting better defensively and scoring a little bit more. Now, what are you going to do when it matters most? That's what we need to find out about the Jets. And we're not going to know that answer today. We're going to have a much better idea in October, November, December. But the fact of the matter is, Sean, after 2 playoff wins in 2 years, the Jets are going to be judged by what they do in April and beyond. So again, I'm not here getting all fired up on July 1st. Now, of course, I mean, in a different world, in a fantasy land and in another world and at another time, would we be fired up talking about the Jets signing Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault and Brady Shea? Would that make for a fun program? Of course it would. But you or I both did not expect that to happen. I mean, I'm sure the Jets would have been more than happy to offer Steven Stamkos 4 years at $8 million. But
Yeah.
I don't think that Steven Stamkos was taking that money here in Winnipeg when he could get that same money in Nashville. So, yeah, I mean, that's going to be interesting to see. What's that?
Yeah. Tax-free
Yeah.
state.
Right. So, I mean, again, it's just it's opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it's the Jets have work to do still. They're going to have work to do over the course of the season. They've got a new coaching staff. But again, they still have the best goalie in the NHL. He's got the reigning Vezina Trophy winner. They have a Norris candidate in Josh Morrissey. They got a bunch of good players, but this group of good players needs to be better in April, May, and June if they want to accomplish their goals. So that is also incumbent upon Kevin Cheveldayoff, even though he wants to give opportunity to some of those young players, many of whom are deserving. But they're still going to need to upgrade their roster over the course of either the summer or during the course of the season. And right now they have the flexibility to do so.
I just got to say, this is one of my favorite comments ever on the Kenny and Renny show. KB Jet says, file your hurt feelings report to Renny. He puts a black bin out weekly in front of his house to put them in. This is a great idea. I know I hurt a lot of feelings. And listen, if it will help you, you can write it down on paper like a complaint box. We will set it up somewhere, the K&R complaint box, and you can file your hurt feeling reports because I didn't tell you that your team won the Stanley Cup by letting 5 players go and bring in 2 backup goaltenders and their 7th defenseman back on this day. So we should talk quickly before Kevin Woodley comes in,
Sure.
or maybe we'll have time, but winners on this day for you. Who do you think won?
Oh, Nashville. And again, hey, could there be buyer's remorse before the contracts are over? Of course there might be. But to me, they added Steven Stamkos, proven winner, captain. I mean, the departure from Tampa Bay is going to be something. I mean, former Jets center Nate Thompson weighed in and provided a bit of a blowtorching on the old Twitter machine, I think, saying that it's a stain on you basically let the best player in franchise history to walk. Yeah. And not only walk, but it was we'll hear from all the parties, but I mean, there's no way, Sean, we've both been around Steven Stamkos a lot, and I think you more than me. This guy did not want to leave Tampa Bay, but he was given no choice in this scenario. Jonathan Marchessault, only one season over 30 goals, and it was a 40-plus goal season, and he was a money player in the Stanley Cup run, and I understand why Vegas didn't want to go to 5 years, but if you're Nashville, man, you brought in Ryan O'Reilly last year on the culture side with Luke Shen. Yes, they lost Ryan McDonough, but man, bringing in Steven Stamkos to help that room that is on, wow, to me, that's big. And even more so, Brady Shea and keeping Alex Carrier. Sean, that's a guy who the Jets wanted as their second pairing right shot defenseman, and he signed for, I think, 3.75 on a 3-year deal. So for me, that's a massive keep for Barry Trotz. Andrew Burnett is going to be thrilled by those proceedings. Yes, Ryan McDonough is a big loss, but Tampa Bay, to me, did a great job here today in free agency. And yeah, I mean, right there, Rob Mahoney, Barry Trotz is playing chess. And hey, Nashville's an attractive place, and a lot of people want to go there. I love what they're doing right now, and they're to me, they're a team on the rise. And again, I think that. Again, there's a lot of teams I think that improved around us, but again, my number one winner for today, and also we're selfish. We get to see Nashville a little bit more often with them being in the division. They already had one of the best guys in the league to talk to in Ryan O'Reilly, and I think I would put Steven Stamkos right up there in that same category. So that's my biggest takeaway from day one here. But yeah, I mean, a lot of teams got better. I think it was massive for the Toronto Maple Leafs to keep Chris Tanev. Yes, I understand the term is long, but for a team that's been trying to revamp its own defense score for years, like Chris Tanev's one of the best additions. I mean, I understand there's guys that are younger than him or have more upside, but for what Toronto needs in terms of becoming a better playoff team, man, I love what they've done. And yeah, I mean, I should say Utah Hockey Club too. I mean, I love how Bill Armstrong's been lurking in the weeds for a long time, and he has absolutely killed it between the draft and the early stages of free agency for me. And Ryan Smith has got to be thrilled, and Ryan and Ashley Smith thrilled as the new owners there. Some good buzz with the new franchise.
Yeah, some good picks. Dieter Meister says Nashville has a very good farm system, so some of their moves made them get older. This to me is important. So you brought up the idea that they brought in Ryan O'Reilly, who clearly is like, I think he's on the other side of the mountain, right? But he's still a really effective player. I'll say this, like last year, I thought Kevin Cheveldayoff did a really good job with his lineup in the way that it was very obvious what everyone's roles were. So by the end of it, when it came time to address the team at the trade deadline, it was easy for him to do it. They clearly needed a 2C. They wanted to get more scoring punch on that line. So you go out and you get Tyler Toffoli. You go out and you get Sean Monahan. They needed more help on the right side. You go out, you get Colin Miller. Now, clearly that didn't work out for them, but it doesn't mean that Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't do a really good job in defining this team and being able to pick those holes. I think this is a really good job by Barry Trotz in going after exactly what they need. The Predators figured out exactly who they were last year and rode that to being one of the best teams in the league outside of their start, essentially. But in the end, when they got into the playoffs against a very plucky Vancouver team that knocked them off, handled that series well, scored at the right time, and then took the Edmonton Oilers to the wall, who then the Edmonton Oilers took the Cup champions to the wall. Vancouver proved to be right there. So if you take Nashville in that situation and see what they did, where they fell short was they needed scoring. Well, you go out and you get a great defenseman who's a real good mix of both defense and offense in Brady Shea. You go out and you get Steve Stamkos, who remains one of the better scorers in the league, and you go out and you get Jonathan Marchessault, who knows how to score. And here, you know what all these guys have in common too? If you all of a sudden look in the last couple of years and you bring in Ryan O'Reilly and Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, well, two of those guys are Conn Smythe Trophy winners, right? All three of them have shown they're established and know how to score in the playoffs. I don't mind that they bring in older players like this, because to the point that was made before, they got young players coming up like Luke Evangelista. I like the idea of, if I've got young up and coming players who show promise, of getting them around players like Steven Stamkos, like Jonathan Marchessault, like Ryan O'Reilly, to learn from them, because then that's the kind of stuff that you're talking about. Basically what they're doing, Ken, is the culture that existed in Tampa Bay that allowed Kucherov to become a star, that allowed so many of those younger players to come up and become stars. Like, don't think for a second that those young players that we see, who are great players there, don't think for a second that a lot of that doesn't have to do with coming in and watching Steve Stamkos work and following in his footsteps. Braden Point, would Braden Point be the player that he is if it wasn't for coming up under the tutelage of Steven Stamkos? They steal that now, grab that, put that in place, and they've taken two of the better leaders of the last generation and made those available to this young staff that they have in this situation here. I think we'll get to other teams and what they did well, because I really like what Chicago did today. I don't think they're competing next year. I don't think they make the playoffs, but I love what they did for Connor Bedard. But some people will take a look at what Nashville did today and say they just spent a bunch of money on old guys. I think they strategically spent money on players who are still really good players, added exactly what that lineup needed, and did so in a way that is going to make them generationally better. This is Barry Trotz is showing to be as capable a general manager as he was a head coach. We want to move back to some Jets talks, and two of their signings today are goaltenders. We want to talk about a little bit about the Vezina, Connor Hellebuyck, all those kind of things. The best guy, you've seen it on this show time and time again, to talk goalies with, is Kevin Woodley, and that's who joins the program right now. Great to see you, Kevin. Let's just start with the guys that the Jets go out and get today. And again, I want to bring in the idea of Wade Flaherty Flats and what he seems to do with goalies when they come to Winnipeg. What do you think Flats is going to be able to do now that he's got Eric Comrie back in the fold and Kakkonen as well?
Well, I'm kind of curious to see how everything sort of sorts out. I thought maybe it might just be Comrie, to be honest with you. I didn't know that they were going to make a second pick. I know you need three. I thought there was enough confidence from Wade Flaherty and from the Jets as an organization that maybe they would stick with Eric Comrie as the two. The one thing I can tell you about Kaapo Kähkönen, when we talk about familiarity and sort of some of the history between Wade Flaherty and Eric Comrie, there is familiarity now with Kaapo Kähkönen and Adam Francilia, who of course works with Connor Hellebuyck, was there when he won the Vezina, giving and the congratulations in Vegas. Has obviously worked with Eric Comrie in the past as well. And as of last year and last summer, when I was there in Kelowna with them, Kaapo Kähkönen is a client as well. So in terms of how they move, how they try and manage their body and manage their movements, and the structure and support that comes with that, sort of biomechanically and technically, there will be a familiarity there amongst the goaltenders, amongst the goalie coach, and amongst the people that they work with in the off season. And that certainly can't hurt, right? Like, at the end of the day, it doesn't make you stop pucks, but understand how they're trying to stop pucks, how they're trying to hold their body in certain positions to give them the best chance at being most efficient and most effective. To me, that familiarity is a positive, and they have that now, from top to bottom, at least 1 to 3 in the organization from a goaltending perspective.
Yeah, and we know how great Eric Comrie was in that last year under the tutelage of Wade Flaherty, right? .920 save percentage and a really solid goals against. Kevin, from watching him, I mean, we know he had some injury issues, but anything else you picked up on Eric's game in Buffalo after the move, or is it just a matter of maybe structure in front of him, or where were things at for him during that 2 years in Buffalo and partly in Rochester?
I've never seen a goaltender get stuck behind a worse environment than what Eric Comrie got stuck in Buffalo. And that's why maybe I was bigger on the Jets just leaving it at Eric Comrie. I would have been comfortable with that. His expected save percentage this year, when I look at ClearSight Analytics, which is to me the best at measuring sort of the environment of goaltenders specifically, they do a lot of other things because you can, of course, juxtapose that environment and apply it to who's creating the most dangerous chances as well. But to me, they do the best job of measuring environment for goaltenders by far. And Eric's was the worst in the National Hockey League for the last 2 seasons. His expected save percentage last year, this is almost hard to believe when you hear it, but his expected save percentage last year in Buffalo was .858. So a lot of people that judge his performance, I don't think they do it fairly. They literally had a couple of guys that they, at times, especially early in the year, wanted to protect. And so every time they needed to protect the goaltender, they handed him a crap sandwich. And so, and listen, it's 2 years in a row now. So maybe you can start to ask questions like, why are teams playing poorly in front of this guy? Is there something there? But all I can tell you is for the past 2 years, nobody had a worse defensive environment in front of them than Eric Comrie. And so, I thought last year at the end, that final game was sort of one of the few times it looked like a team that was playing for their goaltender. And I know it's the end of the year and it's garbage time for a lot of teams in the National Hockey League, but they actually played a decent defensive game in front of him, and he had one of his best performances of the year. So doesn't mean there's not things Eric can do better. I'm not, not ignoring what the numbers ended up looking like, but I really do think you need the context of what the environment was like. And there was none worse. And it wasn't just last year, it was the year before too. So, you put him in a safer environment where he's more insulated, where it's more predictable in terms of where things are coming from. And I think you'll see an uptick in his play. And so now I'm just kind of curious to see whether that happens for him in Winnipeg with Kähkönen in there as well.
So, Kevin, that's the upside on Comrie. I want you to kind of allow us to get into the head of a goaltender and think, what do you need to worry about? What could have happened in Comrie under that environment, that tough environment you're talking about for the last 2 years? And what does he potentially need to be able to get beyond or get over to get back to what we saw from him the last time we saw him in Winnipeg?
Well, I think having an environment and a coach in Wade Flaherty who has confidence in him will help. And you're right. That's not to say that as a goaltender, you don't have to learn how to manage those things yourself and maybe do a better job of, creating your own confidence and feeling that comfortable every time you hit the ice. But again, when you get to those extremes, right? Like, it's easy for me to say, like, yes, you have to manufacture your own confidence and have your own self-belief. But when you get to the extreme of an .858 and you don't play for long stretches, but then when you do, it's behind that. Like, you're getting one of those nights. It's really easy for me to say, and it's really hard to do. So I think mentally if there's steps to be taken, like you guys know that I've believed in Eric Comrie's game for a long time. I mean, as far back as him coming into the league, I remember Dusty Emu telling me there might not be a better goaltender even before he was in the league along the ice than Eric Comrie. It's about having the confidence and the patience to hold his edges and not give up the top of the net as a smaller guy. And I think when he has that confidence, that's when you have performances like you had 2 years ago. I think the fact that it's an environment with people that he's familiar with that have that confidence in him will go a long way towards him having that confidence in himself. There are times when I think, maybe he lacks it a little bit in himself, and that's something he has to work on. But like I said, when you get to the extremes of an environment like that, man, that can be really tough to do. But that's part of the gig.
All right, Kevin, having your resources of being around Kaapo Kähkönen, what can you tell us about him in terms of style? We've often heard about his ceiling and potential. I mean, what's it going to take for him to take that next step as a goalie at the NHL level?
Well, I mean, I think he sort of did last year. You just can't see any of it because he spent a good chunk of it with San Jose. His adjusted numbers weren't bad. Like, he's plus 0.5% adjusted save percentage. And, I'm at the point now where I barely even look at the raw numbers. But the guys that are in that neighborhood last season, and again, really tough environment. It's funny. He had a really tough environment at 885. So you can imagine what 858 looks like for Eric Comrie, right? But that's sort of a bottom five, bottom third, at least for sure, defensive environment that he played most of the year behind. And his adjusted numbers come out with, in the neighborhood of a Joey Decord or a Connor Ingram or an Alex Nedeljkovic, right there alongside an Aiden Hill when I look at the list sort of down the chart. So when you see that, it tells me this is a guy that's already maybe taken a step and is relying a little bit less on the athleticism that I think leads to the conversations about upside, because we can all see that. We can see the dynamic, the power, the ability to make saves in unpredictable and, circumstances and in sort of that goalie 911 mode. But what you want is to have enough control that you're not into that mode too early. And I think when you look at the training that he did, the way he controls his body now and sets up on pucks better, you started to see elements of that. It's just really hard for most people to see it in the numbers unless you have access to the proprietary stuff, because it's not going to show up when you're playing behind one of the worst teams in the National Hockey League right through the trade deadline.
So would it be fair to say, because there was like a lot of belief in Kähkönen, that maybe that belief has worked against him? Because I'll tell you this, Kevin, the storyline that I was told, and this wasn't necessarily last year or the year before when he was with the San Jose Sharks, is this was a player who just could not grasp the brass ring. I know it was said within the Sharks organization, they were waiting for one of their goaltenders to step up and show them that they wanted to be a starting goaltender in the NHL. And over the course of that, it looked like they decided to go with James Reimer ahead of Kähkönen. And clearly they didn't have the most massive belief in James Reimer, because it's not like they went down the road with him after that as well. So is he a guy who basically they, were expecting something out of, or I guess this is a better question. Why was there an expectation or a belief that he should have been into a spot and his organization didn't see him getting into that spot?
Well, I think you can actually rewind that to Minnesota and his time there and some of the conversations around Kaapo as far back as Minnesota. And I know goalie people that felt the same way, like that there was more there than we saw. And the ironic thing is, when I looked at the numbers, because I get it, like you see the skill and the skill set, and that leads you to believe that there's more upside. But when he was in Minnesota and I looked at the numbers, and they were based on small sample sizes because he didn't get a lot of opportunities there. But when I looked at the numbers, I wasn't seeing it. Like I wasn't seeing any of that in Minnesota. And so I was surprised that San Jose expected it to materialize. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this, at least statistically, we haven't seen it materialize until this past year. Like that's the first sort of positive blip. And I think that a lot of the things that can attract you to a goaltender from an upside and potential standpoint, like you could even argue that if you use those things too much, it's what's going to hold you back from a consistency standpoint, right? Like if you're leaning on the types of saves that make you go, wow, but you're making them all the time, it's usually because you're not putting yourself in a position to make the easy ones easily often enough. And that's probably an oversimplification. There's sort of underlying elements that go into that. But I think that's the easiest way to sort of describe a guy who a lot of people would look at from the outside and go, wow, like this guy should be better than his numbers are. And then not find that consistency with multiple organizations. I think the first time, I don't know about grabbing the brass ring, because at the end of the day, we're looking at a guy who's probably going to be counted on to play a hand, like obviously not a ton behind Connor Hellebuyck. You're not even looking at a 1B upside. You're looking at a backup. That's what you want in Winnipeg, right? But that style of play, that reliance on athleticism and rhythm and timing and all the elements that come with not having a consistent foundation, it's even harder to be effective when you don't play a lot, because it relies on timing, it relies on rhythm, it relies on playing regularly. And so the fact that they're bringing him in here probably means that they saw the same things I did last year in terms of the foundation looking more consistent, and a guy who, if that's the case, he'll make the easy ones easily more often. And you still have that, you can still open the car door every once in a while and go goalie 911 when needed. You never want to lose that. But in a structure and system like Winnipeg, that can, especially when you're not going to play much, you need the other part, and you need a goalie coach that's going to make sure the other part is consistently being fed and nurtured on a day-to-day basis, so that you're not only developing, but when you get into a game, you're not sitting there going, oh man, I haven't played in 2 weeks. Do I have it? Right? You feel like you have a trust and a foundation and a system that I don't know was there earlier in his career.
Yeah, we'll get to Connor Hellebuyck in a minute here, but curious for your thoughts on the fit. I mean, I love the fit for Laurent Brossoit in terms of having an opportunity to maybe share the net with Peter Mrazek in the short term, but maybe playing well enough to show that once Connor Bedard's ready to help the Blackhawks level up, that maybe he can be a bona fide number one guy by the end of this. We know they were a little bit loose defensively, let's just put it that way, last year. But what do you think about the fit in terms of where Laurent Brossoit is going on a 2-year deal at a significant raise from last year?
Well, I'm happy for him to get a little bit of term. I'm happy for him to obviously get the raise. He's earned it. I think he's earned an opportunity to show that he is capable of doing more than he had the chance. I mean, his adjusted save percentage, which sort of, when you take work, we look at goals saved above expected, but that's cumulative. When we look at sort of just adjusted save percentage, which sort of on a per shot basis, take out the cumulative nature, his numbers were right there with Connor last year, right? That said, from a fit perspective, in terms of the team they are and his strengths, like there are times when I watch the Chicago Blackhawks and I think they need an acrobat in net, and I'm not sure that's LB, right? And so that can be Mrazek, right? Like, and it's a fine line, right? Like sometimes those guys that look spectacular and look like they're flying all over the place put themselves in a position where they have to. And I think there's times in Mrazek's career where that's been the case. Like there's a reason he has to be flying all over the crease, because he plays aggressively on one side of the ice. He's got to recover quicker to get across to the other. The Blackhawks give up a lot of grade A chances. It's a very different environment. Just because Brossoit excelled in a more structured environment doesn't mean he's like, you don't need to be an acrobat to manage a tougher defensive environment. You can stick within your structure. And I think LB's been around long enough to know that this is how I play. I don't need to chase the game or become something I'm not just because the game's gotten uglier, sloppier, more dynamic and more grade A chances in front of me. So that's a positive, is being around long enough. And that's the temptation he'll have to resist, like to stay within himself and trust that that's enough. It could be one of those situations where he has a really good year and none of us can see it, because again, they're on that end of the scale. In the middle, things wash out a little bit, but on the extremes, that's where things can get a little bit ugly. And they're right now, they're on sort of the downside of that extreme. And LB's coming from a system that, was very, was good for goaltenders.
Oh, we'll have to move on soon, but I think both Ken and I have Hellebuyck questions before you do go. Just for me, I chatted with him after he came off the stage from winning his second Vezina Trophy, and one of the questions right off the bat was just the idea of joining the pantheon of names of goaltenders who have won 2 Vezina trophies. Where do you think Connor Hellebuyck is heading as far as how the game of hockey will see him when he is done with it?
I mean, he's headed toward the Hall of Fame, isn't he? Right? Like we have this conversation. It's funny because a lot of the conversation heading into the Stanley Cup final was, oh, Sergei Bobrovsky, if he wins the Stanley Cup, he's going to go to the Hall of Fame. And I'm like, he's got 2 Vezina trophies and he's going to be top 10 by next year in wins. Like, to me, he didn't need to win a Stanley Cup to go into the Hall of Fame. Like, the 2 Vezinas and getting into the top 10 all time in wins. And Connor's on a similar trajectory, right? Like, so there will be questions asked about playoff success. And I think that's a team thing too. But to me, that's the trajectory he's on. Like, he's one of the greats, right? And so that's I hold him in that regard. I have for a while. He was full value for the Vezina Trophy this year. The only guy that could have made a case if he'd stayed healthy, maybe in the final month, would have been Thatcher Demko here in Vancouver. But again, Demko, the outside world never saw it. Like, he was the same guy he was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But the way they defended under Boudreau and the way they defended under Tocchet, nobody could see it under Bruce Boudreau. I mean, we knew it locally because he was being asked to stop bullets in his teeth. But you're never going to get into that category unless you've got a team that gives you the right type of support. And so I think he's in a great fit. That does not discount the level of grade I think Connor Hellebuyck rises to. And I think you guys see it on a day-to-day basis, the drive that he has to continue to ascend, to continue to find solutions to any problems that may exist in front of him, whether it's the work with Francilia to make sure. That's the other part, durability. Like, Bobrovsky changed the way he trained to get to where he is now. I don't know that I've heard enough about how much and how well he handles the workload, how much he plays and how well he handles that workload at a time when we're seeing it being knocked off for goalies around the league, even the top end guys. And we're starting to hear teams talking about 50 games and 55. Like, Hellebuyck's consistency and durability in that crease, as well as the obvious talent and size and all the things he brings, is a big part of the conversation.
Yeah, just a quick one for me, Kevin. Again, we know that the team played very poorly in front of him, but I mean, anything that you could take out of the playoffs? I mean, obviously the numbers weren't great, but he didn't have a lot of help. But I mean, how would you assess what happened in the first round against Colorado? A very good team, a team that really kind of peaked at their right time versus, the exceptional season that Hellebuyck had during the regular season.
I saw a lot of 2 things in the playoffs. One, and I think he accurately pointed this out. I mean, teams use tips and trap. Like, they really seem to take his eyes away, right? Like, Connor is a goalie who reads the game, maybe at like I say at an elite level. I was almost going to say maybe at like one of the best in the game right now, at anticipating plays and reading plays. And some of the stuff he did with us at Ingo Mag, where he sat down and did video reviews on the pro reads. I think we've got 9 of them up from that segment last summer. I mean, he's calling shot or pass on a 2-on-1 by the time the guy gets over the blue line. So his ability to sort of study the game, and I know his dad on the dad trip talked about him going into a store and studying the curves. Like, that's how he approaches it. And his ability to read and anticipate is next level. By taking his eyes away and the type of traffic they created, that sort of takes away one of his strengths, right? It's hard to, if you're fighting for sight lines all the time and just trying to find the puck, you're less able to sort of filter everything going around at you. So the battle that teams put him through visually was, I think, a big factor in that. And I don't know that that's, I don't know that's anything he can do. The one area that we've seen over the years that teams have really gone to school on in the playoffs, and the Jets have done an exceptional job of limiting this relative to the other chances they give up. They still give up grade A's like every team does. But in the regular season, they've done a great job of limiting the laterals, making him go east-west. And that feeds to his strengths. And that's what you want. You want a goalie and a system and a team that are all on the same page. That allows him to play to his strengths. In the playoffs, it definitely looks like teams are identifying as something they are absolutely trying to create more of. And at a certain extent, you can only prevent so much. So east-west plays are something that I think we've seen, not just in these playoffs, but in past playoffs. Teams they're not going to waste shots. They're going to try and create laterals. And there have been times where that's created issues. And statistically, like I said, weakness is relative. This is one of the best goaltenders in the league. So it's not like he's still around expected. But when you see how good he is at everything else, his performance on laterals, on east-west plays below the top of the circles, relative to how good he is. Like, he's average at that. So, of course, when you see those numbers, you're going to try and attack it. And that's what teams have done. That'd be the one thing that I see as, a targeted effort by other teams to try and exploit something on Connor Hellebuyck in the playoffs.
I have to ask a follow-up question based on the point you were just making. Usually, Kevin, we like to just kind of sit here and just let it pour out of you because you're always so good and you're so insightful on these things. I'm going to give you a Renny bomb here. I'm going to throw a little bit of a grenade in here because I wanted to ask this. So I went off afterwards and I heard a lot of the storyline that because I've said this before, we really haven't seen Connor Hellebuyck take it to the next level in the playoffs in the time that we've covered the Winnipeg Jets. And there was a lot of people who said to me, he just couldn't have possibly succeeded in the playoffs this year. The Jets just made it too hard on him. I don't like the Jets, who I thought were a defensive team this year, get the lion's share of the blame, and that it's basically like the Winnipeg Jets let Connor Hellebuyck down. I don't think it's a healthy thing. I think he's part of the team. I think he needs to own part of what happened there. I'll say it like this. I covered the Oilers and followed them through the third round and the fourth round. And Skinner, who I think has taken a lot of kind of heat over the years for a young goaltender, just because I think the idea is always that goalies are letting the Oilers down. He made a lot of those cross-crease saves that you're talking about, right? Like those kind of game breaking. Where did that come from? You saw it in those 3 wins that he had against the Florida Panthers. You saw him doing it in that Stars series. And I guess my take on that was what it was maybe, and I think you may have answered it with the taking the eyes away, but I guess if you're a fan and you're looking and you're seeing Skinner making those saves, those eye-popping, game-changing, jumping across the crease saves, why have we not necessarily been seeing them from Connor Hellebuyck?
Okay, so in the regular, so the one thing, especially off the rush, and Skinner did make a few, especially in the Stanley Cup final. I'm trying to think of the game. He made most of them in the game they won 8-1. The Edmonton Oilers.
He followed up the next game though with one at a crucial time, and I think he pulled off 2 or 3 of them in that Dallas Stars series. Yeah,
I think the one in Verhaeghe was one of the crucial time ones. Yeah. There was a good third of the net open, and Verhaeghe put it back into him. Stuart Skinner, East-West. Like when we talk about strengths and weaknesses, Stuart Skinner went from being, oh my God, we're in trouble in mid-November. I can't believe we've got this guy as our goaltender. And the Edmonton Oilers were dead last in the NHL in rush chances, high danger, 5-on-5. Skinner was one of the worst goalies in the league, and people in Edmonton were telling me, much like they were in Winnipeg when I used to do radio hits there, to get rid of Wade Flaherty, they were telling me to get rid of Dustin Schwartz. They got rid of the coach instead. They brought in the new coach. Edmonton went from dead last to one of the top 3 teams in the National Hockey League off the rush. In the playoffs, there were moments, I'll give you that. In the playoffs, they still maintain that underlying profile. When I look, in other words, the defensive profile maintained. I just pulled it up, and like honestly, Sean, I hadn't looked this up until right now. Because the Jets were a really good team in the regular season defensively. Here's where they profiled on ClearSight Analytics in the playoffs. Expected goals against 5-on-5, 16th. Expected goals against 5-on-5 against the rush, 16th. Expected goals against 5-on-5 D zone, 16th. Expected goals against on the penalty kill, 11th. So I do think, I'm with you. The Oilers, similar profile, they dipped a little, but they dipped rush chances for them in the playoffs, dipped from, like I said, top 3 in the league to 4th. 4th in expected goals, 5-on-5, 6th in the Z zone, 5th on the PK. So you can't compare those 2 environments. I'm not saying that Connor Hellebuyck doesn't have to make big saves. I'm saying when you go from being a top defensive team to the worst team in the playoffs, and maybe part of that is whether it's systems of the other team getting to them, I just think they were overwhelmed. They gave up way more than we're used to seeing. And I think in some ways it points to the limitations of the position, not just Connor Hellebuyck himself. And like, I think that's somebody at the door asking for my goalie union card back for saying that. But the reality is it never exists in a vacuum, right? And so if the Jets had taken a little dip and Connor hadn't been able to come up with big saves and big moments, I hear you. And it's a fair argument to make. But when you go from where they were to where they finish, again, dead last in every major defensive category, I don't think I look at the goaltending first, even if that doesn't mean you let them off the hook for everything that happened. I think, and listen, Skinner's accountability, we have praised him over at In Goal for years. I go back to Hockey Canada Program of Excellence video coaching opportunity in Stuart Skinner's year there. That was the year that he met the goalie coach in Edmonton, Dustin Schwartz, who was one of the coaches with us at Hockey Canada that year, where they built the relationship that led to him being drafted by Edmonton. And that accountability has always been there. The growth mindset has always been there. He was, one of the coaches said, everybody, all the goalies should make sure they talk to me about, things they could do with their equipment or stuff like that to use me as a resource. He was the only one that actually did. So I've always loved that approach from him. The way he approaches the media, I believe, is a product of some of the people he works with off the ice. And I think the same is probably true for Connor. So not saying I agree with one or the other. I think Stuart's accountability at times might come back and bite him. People will be like, because if he ever stops taking it on his shoulders all the time, and I think you can too much on it. So I just think that there's a different approach there. I can understand where there might be some frustration in Connor coming out at the end of that series and saying, I felt great. I get that. But I do think, like, Ken's a golfer. If you ever had an experience, I used to work for Associated Press and cover a lot of golf. Mike Weir never hit a bad shot, right? Like, never. It was always the lie or the grain or something that he didn't read properly, right? And I do think there are times that a lot of the answers we get are part of a sort of pre-programmed approach to how to handle the media. And so, I fully get where it's coming from, and he's not above criticism. I just think the environment, just the bottom fell out of it to a degree where the goalie's a part of it, but probably not the biggest part of it, because it wasn't a dip, it wasn't a slip, it was just an absolute, to quote Brian Burke, it was an 18-wheeler off the cliff.
That was a phenomenally detailed and extremely valuable for this market, I think, answer and explanation, Kevin. Very much appreciate that.
Well, and listen, the best part is I literally pulled, I hadn't looked that up before, so I was pulling those numbers as you were asking the question. And I would have told you the truth. If it had just been 5th or 6th as opposed to 16th, I would have told you that and would have said there was more responsibility. I was surprised how bad they were. Obviously, some of that is what Colorado did. But man, it's like Eric Comrie with an 858. That's really tough for any goalie to dig his way out of.
Yeah, I thought you had an issue with your editor there that you had to roll, but I'm going to ask one last one. Connor was down to 60 starts last year, and then we'll let you go. Is that enough? Is that enough to keep him fresh, or do you see him moving into the 56 to 58 range moving forward as he moves along here, as the extension starts? Because we know how much he loves to play. I mean,
yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that's a tough one for me to answer because I'm not there every day. I think that the people that know will see the signs of slippage in his game when it happens and have a better understanding for whether that's making sure there's not too many in a row during the season, or was any of that fatigue in the playoffs. Like I said, from the outside looking in, it looked like defensive environment changed completely on him. I think that's why you have a Wade Flaherty and the relationship he's built, not just with Connor, but with Laurent Brossoit, who's now gone, but now Eric Comrie, and he'll build one with Capo. That's why I always used to laugh when people used to call me from radio shows in Winnipeg and say, they got to fire Wade Flaherty. I just think that there's value in having a guy like that knows his athletes on a level where there will be honesty, so that if 55 is an ideal number, as much as Connor might not want to play that little, he's a competitor. You guys know that. There'll be an honest back and forth and a trust that maybe this is the best decision for the team, and working together in as opposed to, just willy-nilly, this is the number and everybody else is 55. So let's be 55 too. We talked about the durability. We've talked about the work he does with Anna Francilia. I'm less concerned about workload for him, but in part because I think I trust the relationships in place in Winnipeg to sort of manage that honestly.
Kevin, as always, I think people are wowed when you get on this show. Consistently, one of the best guests we get on Kenny and Renny, and we get a lot of phenomenal guests. The way you break things down, the way you tell the story, the way you illuminate is absolutely phenomenal. And I just want to thank you again for carving out some time for us.
Appreciate it.
Anytime, guys. It's an honor to be asked, and so I always enjoy it. And just careful, because if you start pumping up like the tire's too big, the head won't fit in this narrow little window much longer.
There you go. Well, we'll adjust the boxes so it does if it ever comes to that.
We'll get the fisheye ready. Don't worry. Have a great summer, my man. Thank you.
Have a great summer. Bye-bye. I thought that was great. That was
just
exactly.
tremendous.
I don't know that we have heard a breakdown of what happened to the Winnipeg Jets as detailed as that, as explanatory as that. I thought it was great. What do we got to cover before we go? First off, I just want to say I'd like you to give a shout out to Sweet Lou.
Yes, sir. For folks who have realty needs they'd like to have met, you can contact our main man, Lou Ferlin, at Roll LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@louferlin.ca. That's LOU@LOUFURLAN.ca. Lou Ferlin, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of the community, including this podcast.
Our main man, Sweet Lou. Want to give a shout out to the Johnson Group, the Kenny and Renny OGs. You and I were talking before the show. We need to get out and have ourselves around with the boys there. We keep talking about it. We never do it. I know they've got young kids, but at some point we need to pay for their babysitter, Ken, to get them out if that's what's going to happen. Can't let the excuse keep going on. And of course, wanted to give a shout out to the Keg. Thank them once again, as all of you should be thankful for all the $50 gift certificates we handed out throughout the year. They really helped us enrich the Kenny and Renny audience, which Kevin just clearly did, but financially the Keg did by making those $50 gift certificates available every show. And one more shout out to the team, TransCanada Brewing Company, who again enriched our audience with 8 packs of the lamplighter they were handing out every single show. They kept our audience with some of their bad takes. We helped them numb the pain from those bad takes with the lamp-lighters. We also helped them celebrate the many highs the Winnipeg Jets had before the end. Hey, that's how it goes for every team in the playoffs, Ken. There's a lot of highs until there's the ultimate low. The Jets ran into that, no doubt. I don't have to go. I don't know what you're up to. I don't know if we talked enough about it. We did want to talk about Chicago and what they did with Bedard. I know you touched on it quickly. You mind if I jump in on this just a little bit?
No,
I thought them going out and doing what they did, and I don't know why his name is eluding me right now. The Finnish player who was originally with Chicago, won a cup with them. Teuvo Teravainen. I think this is a super smart play because it adds finally a little bit of depth down the middle for the Chicago Blackhawks, which means teams can't just come into town and throw everything but the kitchen sink at Connor Bedard. I think this opens up a lot of space for him on the ice. I think adding Bertuzzi allows him to have a true scorer in the NHL that is just going to make it a little bit easier for him. And again, I mean, the common theme here is Connor Bedard, I felt, was really on an island and was almost a point per game player as an 18-year-old in the NHL, the second youngest rookie of the year winner in the history of the NHL, and he essentially did it almost entirely by himself. Like, you take a look at a guy like Nate McKinnon who came up, he was doing it with Gabriel Landeskog out there. There were some other players out there. Connor Bedard was literally almost a one-man show, and we said that on the Kenny and Renny shows. He was the guy who was basically playing with a near AHL lineup and going out, and still great teams like the Jets, Jennings Winnings teams, could focus in on him and still couldn't stop him. This opens up space for him. This opens up opportunities or options for him anyways. And adding the big rig as well, I think, is a message to the rest of the league that if you think you're going to do what you did last year and knock our top player out, break his jaw, do the kind of things that you're doing, that there's going to be a comeuppance involved in this. I don't think it makes the Chicago Blackhawks anywhere near a playoff team, But I do think it's a massive step in the right direction for a team that's also going to be trying to grow from within youth-wise. I think that this opens up things for Connor Bedard. And if you are the Chicago Blackhawks, your number one job right now is to make Connor Bedard feel like he is growing and getting better as a player and on a similar trajectory to, dare say it, a guy like Connor McDavid. You want him feeling like he is a guy who is on the trajectory to being one of the best players in the league. And a lot of the moves they did today, I think, will go to achieving that. You touched on the Toronto Maple Leafs. What I see from the Toronto Maple Leafs in the size that they added, Hakanpää is a really good add. They go out and they get OEL. They get a guy who, just came off winning a cup, knows good stuff about culture, found a way to be a good player with them. Chris Tanev is a battler, great for culture, something everyone likes. What I see here, Ken, is something I saw last year with the Vancouver Canucks. The Vancouver Canucks couldn't get it going for years. And then a lot of people were like, well, how'd they turn the corner? And one of the big answers is last year, the Vancouver Canucks basically switched out 4 of their 6 defensemen, got a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot harder to play against. And then all of a sudden that changed who that team was. The Toronto Maple Leafs have been that team who's sniffed around it for a really long time, but can't seem to really get there. And their defense has been an issue. We talked about it here. Kevin broke it down greatly. When your defense and the team around you doesn't allow you to compete properly, it doesn't matter how good a goaltender you are, things don't turn out well. Well, they get mixed results on goaltenders in Toronto, and I think one of the common themes is they are planning and trying to make it work behind defense that hasn't been up to snuff for a team that wants to compete for a Stanley Cup. I thought they took huge steps, and it changes the way I see that team, especially with Craig Berube, because we know what kind of coach Craig Berube is. Had an awesome conversation with John Montgomery in the hotel lobby here, because the hotel I'm staying at, both the Winnipeg Jets, Jim Montgomery, both the Winnipeg Jets and the Boston Bruins were staying here. And I talked with Monty and I brought up that series we always talk about, Ken, that 7-game banger they had against the St. Louis Blues when he was with the Dallas Stars. And I brought up the idea of like how he made a move, Berube made a move every time it seemed to pan out. And Ken, he seconded the motion that was an unbelievably well-coached series. And he said it's crazy because he goes out and he's the guy the Toronto Maple Leafs get. You're getting a lot of credit around the league if you are the guy the Leafs are going after. You should get a lot of credit if you're a Stanley Cup winning coach, which he is. Monty's suggestion is that Berube is not getting the credit he deserves for what an in-game coach he is. So I think what's happened in Toronto, it really makes them a team to watch. I think they've been trying to break a culture or kind of a trajectory they've been on there. I think the defenders that they picked up today, the kind of defenders they picked up today, and the coach that they have goes a long way to trying to accomplish exactly what they've been trying to accomplish for years and we're trying to accomplish in this offseason.
Yeah, right on. I got a couple quick thoughts, but some more breaking news as we're moving along here. The Dallas Stars signing Kyle Capobianco to a 2-year deal, it looks like, during the course of the program. So we expected the Jets to be...
of the year last year.
Yeah, we expected the Jets to lose him, but he's going to a division rival. And again, whether he's a 7-8 guy with the Dallas Stars or the number 1 call-up with the Texas Stars, good on him for earning a 2-year deal. He provided good minutes in a very difficult role 2 seasons ago, and last year didn't get a crack at the NHL roster. But a couple quick things, and Sean, I'm just going to do this. You gave me the NWO title, but I think I have to bat one back over the net here. After the draft, Sean, we talked about the Jets maybe not being as active today, but maybe trying to take advantage and squeeze some of those teams that are over budget. And man, Kevin Cheveldayoff, it was like he heard what you said, because he certainly mentioned it in his presser today. And Sean, I'm looking at Cap Friendly and seeing the Washington Capitals at $14 million over the cap. And Sean, we know this. We were talking about it. One of the teams that was sniffing around Rutger McGroarty on the weekend were the Washington Capitals. And one of the people that we heard was potentially in a deal involving the Jets would be Connor McMichael, a centerman who's, a former World Junior player. He's sort of going to be pushed down the depth chart by the arrival of Pierre-Luc Dubois. And man, for a team that has to get out, I mean, I'm staring at the Capitals thinking that's a guy that makes a whole lot of sense for the Jets in terms of that spot that is open there. McMichael, I believe, under contract, just give me 1 second here, for 2 more years at $2.1 million, 23-year-old centerman who can also play left wing. He'll be an RFA at the end of the deal. Man, I have to think that would be one of those guys that's potentially on the radar. And the other thing too, Sean, we know that Nick Robertson said he had no intention of signing with the Toronto Maple Leafs. To me, I wonder if Nick Robertson would be a guy that would be of interest. We know how much the Moose have played against the Toronto Marlies over the years. We know that, yes, we know he's not his brother Jason, but I wonder if he would have some interest in another guy too on the back end, right shot defenseman. I was listening to our pal Luke Fox this morning on Sportsnet 590, the Fan in Toronto, before some of the shows got going. So a lot of talk about Timothy Liljegren, even though he signed a 2-year deal at, I think, $3.1 million AAV. I wonder if he is going to be in the mix or remain in the mix for Toronto with the arrival of Tanev and with some of the other things they've got there. To me, he would be intriguing. I know he's not a big physical guy, but he's a puck mover also. The Moose would have played against the Marlies a lot when he was in the American League also. Again, I'm not saying these are massive moves, but I think when you're looking around the periphery, I wonder about guys like Liljegren or maybe even Connor Timmins on the back end there. So those would be a couple things. And there's other teams, Sean, that are going to have this similar issue that what Washington has right now that I would see the Jets kind of poking around. And those are a couple people that are of interest to me.
Well, I'll tell you this. That's one thing I wanted to end this show with, because I know people are saying that I'm being a dour on this whole thing. I listen. I'll talk about the really, really positive things when there's things to talk about. Right? That's the job. My job isn't here to coach you through nothing happened, but stay, keep that chin up, kid. But that said, kind of where I'm going to go in this direction right now. We talked about this before, and I'd said to you before before this all started, or I said afterwards, like, are we surprised? This is what the Winnipeg Jets do. They never do this. What the Jets do is they target teams that are in cap hell, that need to get rid of guys. That's how they got Stastny. That's how they got Nate Schmidt. That's how they got Brendan Dillon. This is what the Winnipeg Jets do. You pointed out a great situation there of a team that's going to need some relief. Did you take a look at the cap hell, the situation that the Colorado Avalanche are in, Ken? They've got 18 players. No. They need another 5 to round out their roster. They've got $300,000 to do it. That's it. This looks like how are they going to ice a team next year is the territory that they're in. So this is a team that is in a lot of problem. There's places to go. This is what the Winnipeg Jets do. They catch teams that are in a bad spot and they take that money off their hands and they take the player off their hands. That's how they operate. Has it worked well in the past? Well, people loved it when Stastny was here. People loved it when Brendan Dillon did it at the beginning of it. People loved it with Nate Schmidt. That one ended up biting them in the ass on the way out. And you saw that in the buyout that happened here. But there's still a lot of places for the Winnipeg Jets to go to do this. And Kevin Cheveldayoff made that clearly and abundantly obvious when he talked about that. I will say this, Ken. I was told he was extremely busy today. He looked to me to not be in the best of moods when he had his press conference. I wasn't in the room, but I saw it on camera afterwards. My guess is Kevin Cheveldayoff tried to be busy today and it didn't work out, and that was frustrating for him that it didn't work out. So all the people who are saying the Jets don't try on this day, that doesn't sound right to me. I think they did try, but I mean, this is a mix, I think, of the trouble in getting UFAs to Winnipeg, but also the way that the Jets negotiate. I do think the fact that the Jets tell you that they were in on Brendan Dillon, that they were in on Sean Monahan, is another way of saying, if you're going to be honest with yourself, that they lost out on those players and they lost out on the ability to lock those players down. I get the sense that at least one of those players is not happy with the process. I'll say it out loud. Brendan Dillon all year made it clear at the end of the year that he was upset that the Winnipeg Jets hadn't. He joked that him and Dylan DeMello would talk about it. I don't think he leaves Winnipeg talking about what a great process it was. I think he was frustrated on his way out the door with the negotiations with the Winnipeg Jets. So Kevin Cheveldayoff and his staff have to wear a part of that. Players that I think there was an opportunity to keep them here. He wasn't able to do that. That said, I do expect the Winnipeg Jets to go down a different route and start looking around all those teams that are in cap hell right now and saying, here's a handout. This is how you get out of it. You just give us your players for nothing, and we're going to try and see if there's guys we can pluck off your roster that we like that you can part with. That's where I see the Winnipeg Jets going.
Yep, I hear you there. It was it's been a fun year. This will be the last. I think it's the last show that we'll have.
Well,
Sean.
we should probably
we'll
commit to, as long as it can work, we should probably commit to coming back after Rutger McGroarty situation.
Oh, sure. Sorry,
happens.
that's
If there's
true.
a
Yep,
Nikolai
that's
Ehlers
true.
trade, we should commit to popping up for those kind of things. I will say this. I wanted to bring this up. Someone
Those
had
will be
said
next
this,
season shows.
Yeah, I guess they would be considered next season shows. I just wanted to bring this up. Gosh, where are we here? Someone had said something along the lines about okay, here we go. CMAC says, I'm pissed though about the McGroarty thing. Chevy should have been seen that this team was good but not capable of beating high-end talent in the playoffs, and gave McGroarty his spot. We need energy. McGroarty has it. I'm going to tell you this right now. I don't buy, and I've said it before, all you folks out here who are spitting mad at the Jets for trying to keep McGroarty out of the lineup and all this kind of stuff. I don't know where you got your information that you think McGroarty was ready and willing to jump into the Winnipeg Jets lineup. To me, this is a storyline pushed by his camp to shift the blame to him not coming to Winnipeg on the Winnipeg Jets and their management group. This whole thing about him looking and being like, oh my goodness, they don't play Cole Perfetti. I don't know if that's the place I don't want to play. I think you're being taken for suckers by his group. I think McGroarty wanted to go elsewhere, is trying to go elsewhere, is trying to shift the blame. And I think people like CMAC are falling for it. Because if you think for a second that he should have been just offered a spot, I completely and totally disagree with that. But I don't think McGroarty was coming to the Winnipeg Jets last year in the playoffs either. It is very easy to shift the blame to the Winnipeg Jets so that God, why do I keep calling him that? Rutger McGroarty was coming here. I don't think that was happening. I had been saying it to you behind the scenes for a long time, Ken, that I didn't think Rutger McGroarty was coming here. And so I guess I would say this: be cautious before you point at the Winnipeg Jets, before you point at Rick Bowness, before you point at Scott Arniel, before you point at Mark Chipman, before you point at Kevin Cheveldayoff as being the fault of Rutger McGroarty being out of town. Are you so certain he was ever coming here in the first place? Because I, for a long time, have suggested that is not the case. Ken, you have anything to say before we go?
No, we've talked a lot about Rutger, and as you mentioned, we'll probably carve out an entire show once the issue is resolved, if it is resolved this summer for sure.
Sounds good. Okay. Regardless, that's it for you're right. It would be the 24-25 season shows that we would be doing here. So this is officially, I guess it's not even,
end of season 4.
This is the first official because the season ended and this is the first act of the new season. So
I don't know.
Welcome to the premiere episode of the 2024-25 Kenny and Renny show. It's just
fifth season.
Keep going, folks. You're not rid of us. We're going to keep going into the new season. We're going to love it, and we hope you're going to love it.
We've been extended. Well. Good news. Good news.
There you go.
Good news. The network has extended us.
Other than that, Ken, you and I are going to get home at some point. It's going to be great when we do. You and I need to get together when we get back home, although we sure made the best of our time stuck here in Vegas together. That's been great. So thank you, Ken. You've been great. Thank you to all of you for tuning in when you do. Someone had asked, we're at about 1,500 people, not quite 2 million, but 1,500. We just crossed that barrier right now in the middle of the day here. So we really want to thank you for taking your time out of your holiday, your July long. Happy Canada Day, everybody. And I'll say this before I leave, as I always do, if you appreciate the conversations happening in this space, please appreciate the contributions by our sponsors who fight to keep the conversation going in this space. Go out, support them because they support you through us. That would be Vittorio Rossi, Cambrian Credit Union, Sweet Lou Furlan, Pristine Roofing, the Johnson Group, the Keg, and of course, TransCanada Brewing. Thank you to them. Thank you to all of you. We will see you when breaking news hits. If it doesn't, we're going to see you in the fall. Talk to you later, folks.